Hello, this is Jeff. Welcome to Introspection with Jeff. I made a huge mistake. I remember some other YouTuber saying way back, such and such, and I'm an idiot. Well, this is my mode of being an idiot. I recorded for an hour just prior to this and realized, whoops, I had my microphone turned off. The light is now on. Okay. Fortunately, I had some notes to go by, and I still have the video. For those of you who can read lips, enjoy. I'll post that just for the sake of posting it. Okay, I will do it again. That was a first run through. Okay, first things first, I'm making some improvements on the channel. I want to be able to create icons, and if you have any comments, please suggest them below in the comments section. I want to make a montage, like an intro, professional intro. And I also thought of a new thing for each video. I don't want to make a video without giving you something to comment on. This is, after all, called Introspection with Jeff. So I want to give you something to comment on below. For this video, I want to talk about the importance of Star Wars. I have it in two sections. I have it in terms of childhood, aspects of why Star Wars is important to a child, and then importance to an adult and to our society in general. I should also mention, as I did in the other video that doesn't have sound, that I almost made a video yesterday about this feeling I had. I'm working two part-time jobs, and the second job is typically, well, yes, today it would have been 2:30 to 8 o'clock. Usually it's 3 o'clock to 8 o'clock at night. And today, in the morning, I left early because I just felt like a zombie. I felt like my freedom as a person was being eked away and drained away. I just needed time to myself. So I left early for my morning job, and I called in sick for my afternoon job. I'm well rested. Certainly felt better rested before discovering that I had recorded for an hour and 19 minutes that I had no sound. But fortunately, I was speaking directly to the camera, and maybe there are lip readers, or maybe there's some way. Maybe I can put text at the bottom of the screen while I save the video. Wow, hour and 19 minutes. Anyway, okay, all right, enough is enough. So onto the topic of today's video. I watch usually millennials, Generation Z, watching Star Wars for the first time, and their reactions on YouTube. And I don't think they have context. And well, it's interesting to watch. They don't have context. They don't realize or appreciate how much Star Wars is important to us as a culture, and the significance and the historical references, the film references it makes, and so forth. So let's start. In childhood, I put the philosophy of the Force. Now, there's the it's explained in the first three movies. Well, let me explain how the movies are arranged. It may seem daunting. There are about 11 movies, and then some television shows back in the 1980s, and then now, and novels and comic books and so forth. It may seem daunting to figure out, but it's not really 11 movies so much as 3 trilogies, each trilogy being a collection of 3 movies, and each trilogy being a beginning, middle, and end. It started off George Lucas started off with just Star Wars, and it was an homage. I'd like to get to that later on. It was an homage to the 1930s and 40s movie serials. Now, a movie serial was shown a chapter. It was made as probably like a 2-hour movie, something like that, split up into chapters. And in Star Wars' case, it was split up into episodes. So they're not just like James Bond franchise movies. They're in a specific order. It's like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And the trilogy is Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. And so the first movie begins it. The second movie have escalating conflict, and then the third movie is the conclusion, the climax. And so that's why you have the crawl at the beginning of each Star Wars movie. Nearly every Star Wars movie. Rogue One doesn't. If I were making the movies, I would have Episode 1 not have a crawl. Now, let me explain movie serials more specifically. So there'd be the main feature, which should be just some Gone with the Wind or some movie you go to see. And then before that, there would be sometimes be a movie a serial chapter. This would be like Buck Rogers or Flash Gordon, or even movies that you may recognize as resembling Indiana Jones. Both Indiana Jones movies and Star Wars movies were made by Lucasfilm. And so the reason for that opening text crawl was that it would summarize what had happened more or less at the end of the previous chapter, to bring people up to speed, so they can go into the new chapter aware of what had been. It was like an introduction. So it wasn't just invented for Star Wars. And they would end at cliffhanger moments, and the way television later did, where there would be a cliffhanger and would go to a commercial break, and after the commercial break, it would come back, and you'd see the rest of the episode. Or in terms like this, it would typically have at the end of it, it would end at a cliffhanger, and it would say probably something like, tune in next week, and it would give an episode title, at this theater, at generic theater, wherever you're seeing, whatever theater you're seeing it, like at this theater next week or whatever, watch this episode 10, and they'll give the title. So that's where that comes from. It wasn't invented with Star Wars, although it's very iconic with Star Wars, and that's kind of nice. So that's a little bit of film history. I'll get into that later on in my adult section of this video. So they're meant to be seen in trilogy, as part of a trilogy. And ironically, I had seen Return of the Jedi as my first movie in general in a theater. My mom told me that I had seen the original Star Wars movie in 1977. I was taken to it at least, and my dad probably would have been there because the two of them were together in those early years, before about the age of 5, and I want to go into that later on in another video, exploring my past and reconstructing what happened. There's some significance there. So I'm told that I was wide awake, and then the lights dimmed, and the movie began, and I was asleep, and then I woke up after the movie was over. Now, I imagine the lights dimming probably had something to do with that. And I was like a year and a half. I was born in November 1975, and the movie came out in 1977. I was probably seeing it in May because traditionally, up until Disney acquired the rights to the movies, they were released in May. Now, there are three reasons for that. George Lucas's birth month was in May, so it's kind of like a birthday thing for him. And there's a phrase, which I believe came later, May the 4th. The phrase, May the Force be with you. And then the third I catch on to. It's convenient when it's released in May, and then you have a long summer, June, July, August, for a movie like, a fellow blockbuster to come out. It gives a lot of time for kids right out of school to watch it. Not that kids aren't the exclusive audience for it, but they're for the child and the child at heart. I'd say these movies were made for. All right. So as a child, so I would have been about a year and a half, something like that. So I did not see the first movie. There was too many things. I'd be curious why I didn't see the second movie. It came out in 1980. But the first movie, I think I saw the first Star Wars movie, and then I think the first movie I saw in theaters was Return of the Jedi. Ironically, that's the conclusion of the trilogy. And yet there are references in there that I caught on to, and I could understand the backstory. It was told so well that I wasn't that lost. And also, at that point, I would see movies more than once. Now, before that time, I remember seeing movies like Superman, Superman 2, the first two Christopher Reeve movies, maybe the one after that, depends. But I definitely at least the first two Christopher Reeve movies on TV at home. And I remember watching Sound of Music at home on a TV screen. But I had made a list some time back of all the different movies I recalled seeing in a movie theater, and this is the earliest by release year that I recall seeing in a movie theater. It's interesting. I wonder if my mom, who had already had seen the first Star Wars movie, A New Hope, if she knew that was a healthy kind of movie for me, healthy philosophy more for me, whether she was okay, and maybe that coaxed her to have this be the first movie I see in a movie theater. But I really latched onto it. Now, there are different orders in which to see the movies. I'll explain the movie order that for me makes sense. You have the original three movies. The first one, 1977, that was initially released as Star Wars. And then just before the release of the second movie in the trilogy, The Empire Strikes Back, the Star Wars movie was re-released as Episode 4, A New Hope. That was after George Lucas had decided, after George Lucas was given the go-ahead and they let him do a sequel. So he had in mind this being a trilogy. 1980 and then 1983 is the conclusion of that trilogy. And for us growing up, although there were other things talked about in magazines, and was the Star Wars, the existence of the Star Wars films was kept alive. Like a couple of years later, there was a Star Wars cartoon. There were two television specials that were Ewok Adventures. There were movies made for television, and there were other things. There was an Ewok and Droids cartoon hour. I believe in 1985, something like that. It's interesting how many of these things came out even 2 years later. I mean, the Kenner Star Wars action figures, which run right alongside the movies themselves, started in 1978 and then ended 2 years after the release of the third and presumably what might have been the final Star Wars movie, Return of the Jedi. They were still making action figures and playsets and so forth. And the Droids and Ewoks cartoon show, they were still making action figures, some action figures for that too. And there was a plan for a Series 2 release. So that shows the impact, some of the impact. So alongside the movies themselves, in some sense, you really needed to have the action figures to know some characters' names and to fill in more information than what you had seen on screen. And in the other video that I recorded, that hopefully maybe you can I can put on. Oh boy, I kicked myself in the foot. Maybe I can put subtitling as to what, and read my lips and put in subtitling what I was saying. I still have that, and I'll still put that up on YouTube. Maybe, I don't know how many of you can read lips, but I'm talking, as I am now, talking directly to the camera. Just didn't have my microphone turned on. I held my microphone too. Anyway, all right, so there are the 3 original movies, and then about 15 years later, George Lucas, about 20 years after the release of the first movie, 1977, in 1997, he came out with a re-release of the original movie and then the subsequent 2 movies, but he altered them, so they were called the special editions, and that's where some controversy comes into play. I can understand his artistic license. He has the right to be able to alter his movies. They're his movies, but I disagree with him on some of the things. And I also believe that these award-winning special effects, which were groundbreaking at the time, should be preserved because of historical relevance. People should be able to go back and see the cutting-edge, state-of-the-art, beyond state-of-the-art, cutting-edge special effects that won awards. They should be able to see those special effects, as well as be able to see what George Lucas wanted to see, what he altered, his new version of the original movies. So anyway, 1997, and then that was a precursor to the prequel trilogy of 3 movies, 1999, and then I forget the other movie, I think 2002 and then 2005, something like that. So some people watch the prequel trilogy. If you're watching them in episode order, I think it's really out of order in terms of your mind. I'm speaking from the point of view as not necessarily an established filmmaker, but I'm speaking from the point of view of an aspiring filmmaker who understands narrative structure and understands how the mind interprets and follows story. If you watch the original trilogy, 4, 5, and 6, because I think it's easier on the mind to become familiar with the movies, so that when you watch the prequel trilogy after that, it's not, your mind isn't jumping. It's like if you're experiencing George Lucas's frame of mind when you're watching a trilogy, because they were each made close together as a trilogy. That's like a certain period of time in filmmaking. George Lucas was a different filmmaker in a certain sense when he was making the original trilogy than when he was making the prequel trilogy. And the focus is different. The original trilogy was focused in a different sense than the prequel trilogy and the sequel trilogy. The sequel trilogy was made by Disney itself without George Lucas's assistance. So, that's a different picture. That obviously, I think both camps will agree to watch that at the end. But anyway, the original trilogy is from like a certain time in George Lucas's mind and in the minds of other people. There's like a zeitgeist, a certain time, And then, so if you watch episode, like if you do it in machete order, um, it's even more awkward. If you're then watching even the prequel trilogy and then the original trilogy, because you're jumping time periods. It's not like he made all these movies all at once. You're going through a movie made in 1977, albeit with altered special effects, and then in 1980, and then you jump to a prequel trilogy made in 1999 and 2000 something or other in 2005. There was a different mindset. Opinions had changed. I mean, it's a different time in George Lucas's life. That's number one. Number two, you're watching the original trilogy. They were coming out without any prior knowledge. I mean, there was no other Star Wars before this. So when they came out, especially the first movie, you're being introduced to these things on a gradual basis. Obi-Wan Kenobi explains the Force to Luke Skywalker, and you're introduced to these characters and these situations new. Everybody's on a ground floor. Everybody is on common ground, learning these things for the first time. And then you have Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And then when you watch the prequel trilogy, at the very beginning, you're inundated with references to all sorts of different things. And I think you're expected to have seen the original trilogy before having seen the prequel trilogy. It flows easier on your mind. I mean, chronologically, okay, you may decide I'll watch in the order of events, but that you may decide to do that, but I think it's easier on your mind and easier to grasp and become familiar if you watch the middle trilogy, the way the information is unveiled to you. And there are some people who there are a lot of people who say, oh, I don't need to even see the middle trilogy, or I'll go in and I already know the two major spoilers. I mean, the two major things that I guess everybody knows. But it's interesting watching the reaction videos on YouTube, because they know technically what those spoilers are, but they don't know what context they're presented in. And it's not like, and usually, well, many times they guess wrong as to when they occurred, when they were revealed in the trilogy. You have to see them in proper context, because their specific plot points. I mean, not just plot point is saying it mildly. I mean, they're real shifts in the direction of the story. They make a real impact on the story, and it's not just at the end of the third movie. So I believe it's best to watch. So if you watch the prequel trilogy, you're already spoiled. So if you watch the prequel trilogy, it's like uncoiling a slinky. You uncoil a slinky, and all the tension is lost, and it won't spring like it's supposed to. If you watch the prequel trilogy, you may enjoy the twists and turns in the prequel trilogy, but it's revealing, it's giving away, it's spoiling plot revelations that come in the middle trilogy. So even as George Lucas put it, if you watch the prequel trilogy, you're seeing the whole landscape from one character's point of view, and if you watch the middle trilogy, you're watching it from a different character's point of view. I don't think I'm spoiling anything. Speaking of spoilers, if you watch the original trilogy, you're seeing it from, you're learning new things from Luke Skywalker's point of view. And if you're watching the prequel trilogy, you're experiencing things from Anakin Skywalker's point of view. And the two don't jive together, because the two don't connect together, because they're two different characters, Anakin and Luke. I won't explain why, how they're I won't go into that any further. They're different characters. So for that reason, and for the reason I mentioned before, that in the middle, the original trilogy, things are explained at a more gradual level and introduced, assuming that you have no knowledge before of this stuff in Star Wars. I think it's best to watch the original trilogy first. And you can watch there's also the Machete Order, which, as I mentioned before, is where you watch the first two movies and then you do a flashback and you watch the prequel trilogy and then you continue with the third movie, and that's jarring personally for me as understanding the way narrative flow in the mind works as a viewer. It's just plain jarring, because the prequel trilogy was made at a different time than the original trilogy. It was made in a different, it's just a different mindset was existing when the prequel trilogy was made. And I think also that the prequel trilogy was made with the presumption that you would have seen the original trilogy. So it's inundating you with a lot of extra stuff. It's elaborating upon, it's building upon what you would have learned, become already familiar with in the original trilogy. As I said before, it's you could watch the prequel trilogy first and then the original trilogy. That makes some sense. But to jump, you're basically going from 1977 to 1980 in terms of like a filmmaker's mind and so forth, where George Lucas was in his head and so forth. Going from and the style of storytelling and the flow of the narrative. You're going from 1977, 1980 to 1999, 2000, 2005, and then finally to 1983. It's just jarring. Okay, so there are three. I'd like to seriously talk to whoever came up with the Machete Order. I can see some sense why that would have been suggested. It's possible that whoever suggested it really liked the prequel trilogy and was curious why, curious to see what new viewers would make of this prequel trilogy. He was just eager and couldn't wait until the reaction to the third movie, Return of the Jedi, had been done before going to the prequel trilogy. Maybe there's some sense that if you do a flashback, you understand it from Anakin's point of view, so forth. But all right, speaking as somebody who went in fresh, just seeing Return of the Jedi, there are enough references to the backstory. Maybe I'm unique in the sense that I'm capable of doing this, but there were enough references in the backstory to understand what was going on and understand Darth Vader's motivations and Luke Skywalker's motivations and so forth, and still feel for the characters. This is before the prequel movies even existed. I could understand that. So maybe for the first time you could, for example, if you're watching it on camera as a first reaction or something, you could, or just for the first time in general, you could watch it, but please go back and watch it a second time and catch those references. There are enough in there. And if you know something about history, there are definite historical allusions that I'll mention later on, so that you get a sense of what the storyteller, George Lucas, is getting at. They're pretty direct. In some sense, I've noticed that there are differences between what the backstory is in the original trilogy and the way they were finally executed in the prequel trilogy. I still think that there's some differences. There's some moments when it seems interesting in the prequel trilogy, but then you look at the original trilogy and you're thinking, how is this? How could he not know if this had already existed? And it's like twists. It made sense in the prequel trilogy alone, but when you see it as one large saga or storyline, it doesn't quite compute. All right, I'll just leave it at that. So I'd suggest seeing the movie several times, and back then we didn't have. Okay, VCRs did exist, but they weren't. They were pretty expensive. And take a look at how expensive video cassettes were, especially video cassettes of commercial films. If you think like streaming, I mean, you'd see streaming and DVDs and Blu-rays are cheap in contrast to how much a video cassette, which of course you know the quality of image on a video cassette, how expensive those were when they came out. So going back to the theater several times and also owning the Kenner Star Wars action figures was something significant, and the storybooks that would tell the story and then include photographs. That was something that could keep the movie alive for you and you could revisit. It's not like you could just, at that time, you could just pop in a copy and just watch on the fly. All right. So it's 3 trilogies, nice and neat 3 trilogies, an original trilogy, prequel trilogy to like set things up, and then a sequel trilogy that was made by Disney. And about the time of the release of the first movie, there were 2 other Disney movies made. They were a Star Wars story. They were both called a Star Wars story, Rogue One and Solo. They both take place between the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. Now, this is really a must. Please see Rogue One after seeing the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy, because Rogue One takes place right before Episode 4, A New Hope. And then within that, there are references and character appearances from the prequel trilogy. I mean, you could see Rogue One independently, but you won't really get an appreciation of it without having seen at least the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. I like Rogue One because it sets things up. It does something that is referenced, and I, as somebody who's very much somebody on backstory and following all the ramifications and what's going on in the background that you don't see on screen, I appreciate Rogue One as delving into the war and the conflict. Star Wars is more than just lightsabers and spaceship battles. There's a whole war going on, and there are allusions to like World War II and the Roman Empire and tyrannical governments and so forth that were very clear. I mean, George Lucas explicitly said these are allusions to those things. All right. So let me get into the first part. There's childhood and adult. Why Star Wars is relevant to childhood. Personally, there's the philosophy of the Force. Now, I think of the Force as simply the Force. There's a dark and light side. Obi-Wan Kenobi explains to Luke Skywalker that the Force is what surrounds us. It's an energy field that penetrates us, surrounds us. Let me see if I can explain it in an easy way. I think of it as it's sort of like Eastern philosophy and religion. It's even referenced as a dying and old religion in the first movie. Star Wars: A New Hope. The Force, I think of as simply a part of the universe. It's like a connection with the universe, like a connection to the universe, and you can channel positive emotions or negative emotions. It's still the Force. You can manipulate the Force. You can become very angry and vengeful, and you become you can't think straight and clouded in your thinking, and the outside world is distorted. Your mind is distorted, and that's what I would see as the dark force, the dark side. It's not the dark force; it's the dark side of the Force. And then there's the light side of the Force. When you're clear-minded, one of the characters even mentions in the second movie, The Empire Strikes Back, that you can be able to see clearly when you're calm and at peace. I mean, use those words: when you're calm and at peace. You don't have these distractions. Nothing's clouding your mind. And I believe that's how that's how Luke Skywalker is able to realize certain things in Return of the Jedi when he's talking to Obi-Wan Kenobi. And some people say, like, what? Huh? Where did that come up suddenly? I mean, it was a change for the third movie. George Lucas did change something, as I understand it, to conclude a loose, dangling thread, concluded for the third movie. But there is something about Luke Skywalker, I think, being able to recognize some truth because he was clear-minded, and it was like within his subconscious, I'm guessing, and it came to him, and he was able to recognize, oh yeah, it's clear to me, such and such and such, because he was clear-minded. He wasn't enraged. The dark side of the Force, those destructive emotions, weren't dominating him. They weren't taking control over him. So that's a very positive, healthy philosophy towards life. And imagine, I believe I was like 7 when I saw Return of the Jedi. Imagine being young like that, and that being the first movie you see in a movie theater, and being that movie being the first one you really gravitate towards and take it in, and as part of your lifestyle and part of your essence. And then the second part is energetic hero, role model. Luke Skywalker, he was loyal. There was camaraderie. He believed in the good of people. That was a very good, healthy role model to have. And I put his father. I won't go into anything further. You might already know what I mean. I don't want to spoil anything, but his attitudes toward his belief in his father. In the Greek language, there are different words for love. There's erotic love, I think is eros. You can have love for your family. You can have love for your country. I think that's another one. Love for God, or some divine force. There are different words, and I think this is the best expression. What he does for his father is the best expression I've ever seen for love for your family. And then I have exotic locales and creatures. As with Star Trek later on, that I got into after my interest in Star Wars kind of died down. It's had a resurgence in my life, my mind. More recently, Star Trek, after that, Star Trek had the same aspect, encouraged the same aspect in me. As someone who's interested in how expected reality can be twisted, imagination kicks in, there are different possibilities and so forth. What if this and what if that? The exotic locales and creatures. It's not in Star Wars. The creatures aren't just like a mask put over somebody's face. It's not just squiggly lines on somebody's face. They're they're award-winning special effects. Award-winning practical effects, I should say. They're very elaborate. The creatures are very elaborate. Especially Jabba the Hutt. I mean, they're really elaborate. And there's a camaraderie, of course, that these are heroes. They have a loyalty to each other. They work together. They believe in the positive, positive goals, positive life. That's very healthy. And then, of course, the toys. There's something about, now I mentioned Kenner action figures. There was something called the Early Bird Special. They weren't able to come out with the action figures when the first movie was released in 1977. so they came out with an early bird special because they couldn't produce it in time for Christmas. But I think 1978, yeah, they were able to release a few of them, but it's not like they had in mind just one figure or a few action figures, and that would be it. I don't know for sure, but the way they already had, the fact that they already had like a handful, I can't remember how many, but like a handful of characters already released in that early bird set implies that they wanted to take this further and come out with more action figures. So by the end of it, 1985, now this is 2 years after Return of the Jedi, what may have been the final film in the Star Wars saga, they were still making action figures. They had, by that point, they had close to 90 action figures released. And there's something about that, as I said before, the characters' names, and there's some information that's not given directly in the films. Like, for example, the term Ewok is not mentioned in the films. But you learn the Ewoks' characters' names, and you learn the term Ewok. Just various things like the names for the X-Wing fighter. I don't think even X-Wing fighter is even mentioned in the films. But the toys, X-Wing fighter, Y-Wing fighter, TIE fighter, and so forth. You pick up this vocabulary. And it's also nice. It's like some people with model kits, like model cars and model planes. There's something about picking them up and turning them around. There's something very tangible about it. You can see detail. And again, like as somebody who doesn't have access to being able to watch movies just on the fly and just putting a movie in, I mean, at that time, this was another auxiliary way to experience these movies. And of course, the card art, they would be packaged on a card with a scene, either with a picture of the character, a photograph, not just a picture, a photograph of the character, either just as an official release by, from George Lucas's company, or as part of a scene within one of the movies. Same way with the Kenner action figures of the Indiana Jones toys, which actually at the time, the toys were not, even though they were the action figures of Raiders of the Lost Ark, I don't believe they were released as Raiders of the Lost Ark action figures. I believe they were released as Indiana Jones, something like Indiana Jones Adventures action figures. But they were all Raiders of the Lost Ark characters. Incidentally, I wanted to buy the whole set, and I as a child, I raked leaves and bagged them and so forth to earn enough money, and I'm proud of myself. I bought even Marion Ravenwood. Sadly, the condition of the figure isn't all that great. But I had all the action figures in that first set. I think in that only, I don't think there were any newer. I had all the action figures, except for the special play sets. Like I didn't have the thing with the arc itself, and then Balak, whatever his name was, in the Hebrew, the priest garb. And I didn't have the Cairo street, whatever. I didn't have that, but the horse or whatever. But I had all the action figures, the separately carded in action figures. All right, so moving on to adulthood. The reason why these movies are important to us in adulthood and part of society. Now, 1930s homage, 1930s and 40s movie homages. Now, as I said before, these movies were not, if they seem old, they're older. That look is older than just 1970s and early 80s. They were made as an homage. The look of them comes from the 1930s and 40s movie serials that I was talking about before. That's why the crawl goes like that. Some of the original movie serials, especially the science fiction movie serials, and I don't know what you call the Indiana Jones movies. I mean the what they were an homage to, what genre they were. I guess you'd say like treasure hunting movies, adventure. They were both adventure movies, adventure genres. They might have even had the crawl either crawling, scrolling vertically or scrolling like that, at its tilted at an angle, and it would typically say like chapter something or other, and it would give the title, and it would give a summary of what happened in the cliffhanger of the prior chapter. So to understand that would familiarize yourself. To understand why that is in Star Wars would familiarize yourself with movie history. So you have two genres. You have the science fiction kind of movie serial genre, Star Wars, and Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. Then you have the I keep wanting to say swashbuckler. You have the like adventurer genre with Han Solo and so forth, and that's like a separate genre, separate storyline, inserted and like interwoven into the battle between the Empire and the rebels. The transitions are a specific homage to that. That's why the transitions are the way they are. It's not because of 1980s and 1970s movies. That wasn't contemporary. People seeing it then would have caught on that this is something unusual, and if they had known their history, they would have known exactly what it was mimicking those 1930s and 40s movies. Now, going on to film references. There are two aspects to film references. And it kind of ties into the word homage. There are several inspirations. Some inspirations, George Lucas himself has said, yeah, I was inspired by this, or this connects with that other movie. There are some novels and some movies that were probably inspirations, although nobody's explicitly said they were or confirmed they were. There's one Japanese movie called The Hidden Fortress, and that it's a battle. It's a Japanese movie. It's a battle, and then you have two squabbling characters. They're essentially soldiers amidst this whole landscape of a battle, and it seems like they were the inspiration for R2-D2 and C-3PO. Now, at some moments, George Lucas has said the Star Wars saga is told from the point of view of these two droids. And I differ with that. It depends on what you mean by seeing through the eyes of. I've seen The Hidden Fortress, and I don't know if anybody's said that about The Hidden Fortress or not, that the whole story is told from the point of view of these two squabbling soldiers, but I could see what they mean. In both cases, the two soldiers are like lowly characters, not in high positions of authority or central foci in this climactic battle. There's also a set of novels. It was originally 3 novels. I had that, and then I in a move I left them behind. called Foundation's Edge. And then after that, there were other novels. It was originally a trilogy, just like Star Wars. It was originally a trilogy called Foundation's Edge, and there they had an empire. I think it was on a galactic scale. You had, I think it was an empire, and you had people with various powers and so forth. And it's reminiscent of what you'd see in Star Wars. And there was also, now this is interesting, for those of you who have seen the new movie Dune come out, I'm looking forward to seeing the second movie, which I guess should be telling the second half of the Dune book, which was written, I believe, by Frank Herbert. And there were subsequently released novels, Dune novels. I think there was Children of Dune, maybe Son of Dune, something Seeds of Dune, or whatever. There were subsequent novels. And it's interesting, in the novels there's a desert planet. Desert shows up a lot in the Dune novel, and there's a giant earthworm. That I wonder if there's any connection between that and the worm you see in the movie Beetlejuice. But anyway, if you see Return of the Jedi, and you have the Sarlacc pit, and you see the Sarlacc creature, I'm thinking that there's a connection there. There's some inspiration between that and the worms in the Dune novel that was made before. There was no movie released, but it was made before Return of the Jedi. So there are references like that, and then there are also film visual references. You can see in both famous sagas released by Lucasfilm. I'm talking about Star Wars and Indiana Jones. There are videos on YouTube. There's one really good one where you see a moment in Star Wars, like a certain scene is set up, a certain frame, whatever is set up. Their characters are angled a certain way, and then it's mimicking directly a scene from some other movie, and it's as though George Lucas, is hoping that you would recognize this as looking like this scene or moment in this other movie, and he's hoping that you will compare the two. Either the context of this scene adds new context to what's going on here, or it juxtaposes it. It's like it contrasts it. And from my study of biblical texts, especially the 5 books of Moses, it happens in there too, where there are references to other texts, other pieces of literature, that it's kind of hoping, or at least you gain something if you can see the comparison between the story being told here, or the reference or whatever here, and the reference somewhere else. It adds context to it. So there's that too. And then, of course, there's the importance of understanding what an impact George Lucas's special effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, had made in the film industry in general. I mean, he started off with like a handful of people to form Industrial Light and Magic because, as I understand it, the level of special effects just wasn't up to snuff to be able to make what he envisioned. So they really, it's like necessity is the mother of invention. They really pushed themselves to create literally award-winning practical effects. And then they went on after that, and they grew and grew. I mean, as you can see, the level of effects, especially if you watch the despecialized original theatrical versions of the movies. This is why I believe those movies, that those versions of the movies should be recognized and continue to be available for people to watch. The level of special effects becomes greater and greater between the first movie and the third movie, and then the subsequent, prequel trilogy, and even those were edited and changed with George Lucas's revisions and updates and newer releases and so forth. All right, so after working on those films, Industrial Light and Magic had become the forerunner of special effects, and they went on to do the CGI and computer morphing effects for Terminator 2, Judgment Day, and other movies. In fact, if I recall correctly, they went on to become or spin off Pixar Entertainment. That's how big they were. It's ironic that when they began developing CGI, I mean, even when they were developing CGI for the episode 1 of the prequel, the movie of the prequel trilogy, they were developing and innovating CGI special effects. I mean, it's pretty drastic. Up until that time, somebody mentioned that possibly Star Wars Episode 1 of Phantom Menace was the first movie to have CGI to that extent for like a whole portion, for a whole movie. I mean, there were live action actors, but I mean, to that extent for that long a period of time in the movie. And I remember some criticism at the time, like, this looks different. And then you had Avatar later on. It'd be interesting if Avatar was done by ILM, Industrial Light and Magic. It would be interesting. But it was like, for those of you who remember how groundbreaking and different Avatar was when it came out, it was like that. It was, from what I remember, it was, wow, it was totally different. And George Lucas, I'm sure he has said, and I'm sure he would say, that finally that level of CGI came, at least approximated what he envisioned the look to be. It must have been a great tool for him to be able to finally be able to put to screen what was in his mind and not be limited by practical effects. Because in making the original 3 movies, I mean, this is a credit to ILM in general and the crew working on those movies. It wasn't just George Lucas. They had to deal with dust and wind. They had to deal with elements of the environment. Things would break down and so forth, and they had to fight through that. It's amazing what was able to be pulled off physically with props and sets and the wind and the weather conditions and so forth. I remember saying this in the earlier video, and again, hopefully I'll be able to put subtitles and release and add them to that earlier video that I recorded without sound, unfortunately. Something about George Lucas. He was very much his own person. I mean, he owned Lucasfilm, Industrial Light and Magic. He didn't have to answer to anybody else. He was the captain of the ship, and he was able to push it and get it up to snuff and like rear it towards maturity. Must have been something really, really nice, not to have to answer to anybody else. I'm imagining he would have talked with other people and heard them say, well, this is what I originally envisioned, and this is what I would have liked to have seen, but the studio came in, and my version was originally this way, but it was changed, and they didn't want to do that, and so forth and so on. I can imagine George Lucas being really proud that there was no outside studio. I mean, he said this several times in interviews in the past. He owned his production company. What he wrote had a chance to get on, at least a good chance to get on screen the way he wrote it. So I'd like to make a list actually of the different films that Industrial Light and Magic had been responsible for producing in terms of special effects. I wish more people would realize their impact on the film industry. Let me see. That's, well, it's about an hour. It's not exactly word for word, but I'm approaching the same length of time that I was in the prior video. It's about an hour now. The other one was an hour and 19 minutes. Let me see if I covered everything here. My voice is, of course, now I've done it twice, so basically I've been talking for almost 2.5 hours. All right, I think I have just about everything I wanted to say. All right, please leave something. Please leave your own comments in the comment section below. And as I said before, I'm going to not produce another video without leaving you something to comment on. So for this video, please comment if you've, especially if you have a movie in mind from your childhood that really inspired you, perhaps inspired you for life, inspired a certain attitude towards life, a certain philosophy. And also, if you have a movie that you think hasn't gotten the praise or the attention or been appreciated or understood to the extent that it deserves to be, please comment below in the comment section. And as usual, if you have suggestions like making sure to check to make sure that my microphone is turned on, if you have suggestions on how I can improve this channel, or comment on this video, how I can improve this channel or improve just individual videos, like improve the look of a video in general, please comment below as well. And with that said, I've got to get to bed. It's 12:17 in the morning, and I'm going to be going into work a few hours from now. So until next time, have a good day. Have a good night. Have a good day.